You ever walk into a place you know well, and before you can identify a single thing that's changed, some quiet part of you says, this place is wrong now. Maybe it's a grocery store you visited 100 times, except you went in 10 minutes before closing, and the aisles seemed longer than usual. Maybe it's your office on a weekend, with all the same desks and chairs sitting there without the people who normally explain why they're there. Maybe it's your child at home after somebody else has moved into it. You can still recognize every room, but it's like none of the rooms recognize you. Nothing dramatic happens. The lights stay on, the doors work. Nobody appears at the far end of the hallway wearing an old-fashioned nightgown. That's always helpful. But still, something feels off. You look around as if the place has made a mistake and you're trying to find it. In a world full of noise, trust the signal. If you're hearing this, you've already found it. This is Dove and Serpent Radio. I've been thinking about places because we tend to talk about them as if they're only containers. Right? A room is 4 walls, a ceiling, a floor, and whatever people have decided to put inside it. A road is pavement connecting one location to another. A store is shelves, fluorescent lighting, and at least one shopping cart with a wheel that's given up on cooperation. But that's not how we experience places. We experience them as patterns. The sound of people talking near the entrance. The smell that meets you when the door opens. The usual amount of light. The direction everyone is moving. The person who's normally behind the counter. The music you barely hear until it stops. Your mind learns all of it without asking you to pay attention. Then one part goes missing. The music is off. The air conditioner is silent. One aisle has been emptied for remodeling. A familiar employee isn't there. Maybe the entire place is the same, but you arrived at an hour when you have never seen it before. So the pattern breaks, and the body notices before the mind can prepare a reasonable explanation. Wrong. I once stopped at a grocery store just after midnight. It was one of those enormous stores that stays open late but clearly resents you for knowing that. There were maybe 5 customers inside. No music was playing. The bakery lights were turned off, so the cakes were just sitting behind the glass in darkness, waiting for morning or judgment. I needed coffee and something that could legally be called dinner, although the frozen burrito I selected had very little interest in the position. Halfway down the cereal aisle, I heard somebody softly whistling. The tune was familiar, but I couldn't place it. Every time I moved toward it, though, it seemed to come from the next aisle. I walked past the canned vegetables, the cleaning supplies, the pet food, and an unreasonable amount of seasonal candy. The whistling remained one aisle ahead. Eventually, I reached the far wall. There's nobody there. An employee was stocking yogurt nearby, so I asked if he'd heard it. He nodded without looking up. "It does that when we're almost empty," he said. And so I asked what he meant by that. He looked down the aisle for a moment and he said, the building, I guess. And then he went back to the yogurt. And that's not the kind of answer you want from a man arranging dairy products at midnight. There are several ordinary explanations. Sound travels strangely through large empty buildings. Refrigeration systems can make high shifting tones. Somebody could have been whistling near the front of the store, and maybe the shelves reflected the sound. The employee may have been tired, amused, or simply unwilling to have a longer conversation with a man holding 2 coffees and a burrito. I accept all of that. I also left without the burrito. Sensible explanations don't obligate you to stay somewhere that suddenly feels like it knows you're alone. Empty places feel different because people are part of the architecture. But we don't usually think of them that way. We think the walls hold the people, but the people also hold the room together. A school hallway between classes is ordinary. The same hallway at night can feel like a copy of itself made from memory. A church filled with people is a community. An empty church is a question with furniture. The objects haven't changed. Their purpose has become temporarily unavailable. Chairs are meant to hold people. Counters are meant to separate workers from customers. Hallways are meant to contain movement. When nobody is using these things, you begin seeing the objects themselves. That is when a place can start to look staged. You recognize the arrangement. You can't locate the person who arranged it. I think childhood memories have that quality. Most of us remember rooms in pieces, a patch of carpet, the underside of a table, light coming through curtains we couldn't reach, the strange height of a kitchen counter before we grew tall enough to see what the adults were doing on it. Then you return as an adult and the room is smaller than the memory. And that can feel almost offensive, you know. You carried this enormous room for 40 years. It contained Christmas mornings, arguments overheard through the wall, sick days in bed, the sound of somebody washing dishes while you were supposed to be sleeping. Then you stand inside it again and realize you can cross the whole thing in 6 steps. The room didn't shrink. The person who first measured it is gone. Maybe that's one reason familiar places sometimes feel wrong. We're expecting them to preserve a version of us that no longer exists. We return looking for evidence. Here's where I sat. Here's where I waited. Here's the window I looked through before I understood what I was waiting for. The place remains, but it can't recreate the person who first knew it. So you end up standing beside your own memory, like 2 visitors who arrived at different times. There was a house near where I grew up that remained empty for years. It was a small white house, green shutters, and a porch that leaned slightly to the left as if the building had been listening through one wall for too long. Nobody seemed to own it. The grass was cut sometimes, but nobody ever arrived to cut it. A lamp appeared in an upstairs window every winter, though the house didn't seem to have electricity. Children in my neighborhood had some unusual theories. A woman had died there. A man lived in the basement. The house moved 3 inches closer to the road every Halloween. Children are just excellent at folklore, because they haven't yet learned that a story is supposed to become less interesting when it becomes more accurate. Years later, I drove past the place. I saw a family unloading groceries from a minivan. The porch had been fixed. The shutters were blue, and a plastic slide stood in the yard. I expected the house to feel normal at that point, but instead it felt stranger. An empty house can contain anything you imagine. An occupied house has chosen a life without consulting you. And a girl stood in the upstairs window where the winter lamp used to appear. She looked down at the road and waved. I waved back. Then an adult stepped into the window and pulled the curtain closed. Nothing supernatural happened. The girl lived there. I was a stranger slowly driving past her house. The curtain was the correct response. But I remember the feeling of it. The story had noticed me looking and shut the door. Places become strange when they expose the difference between what is there and what we brought with us. You can walk into a completely ordinary hotel room and dislike it immediately. The bed's made, the bathroom is clean, a tiny coffee machine is prepared to produce a warm brown liquid under legally controlled conditions. Still, you don't want to take off your shoes. Maybe there's a smell beneath the cleaning products. Maybe the room's too warm. Maybe a mirror faces the bed, which feels less like interior design and more like an accusation. Maybe the door to the adjoining room has a handle on your side, and part of you becomes very interested in whether it is actually locked. Your body collects details your attention has not yet put into sentences. And that matters because sometimes the feeling that a place is wrong is useful. A broken exterior light, a car idling near an entrance, footsteps changing speed behind you, a person watching the room instead of participating in it. You may notice the pattern without knowing what you noticed. Leaving is allowed. You do not owe a strange parking garage an opportunity to prove you were overreacting. Now, at the same time, anxiety can place a warning label on an ordinary room. Exhaustion can make everything look slightly counterfeit. Grief can drain the meaning from a familiar house, even when the chair and the cup and the coat beside the door remain exactly where they were. You don't only miss the person, you miss the version of the room that existed around them. Animals, they seem to understand that places are more than objects. A dog becomes excited several streets before reaching a familiar house. A cat rejects an expensive bed but becomes emotionally committed to a square of cardboard beside the refrigerator. They read scent, sound, direction, temperature, routine. Change one piece, and an animal may stop at the threshold. An electrical sound or unfamiliar scent could explain it, but the explanation still reminds us that a place contains far more information than we receive consciously. Maybe a place feels wrong because it is wrong. Maybe it's only wrong for the person you are expecting to be when you entered it. I wonder which room you are in now. Some of you are listening in bed with the screen turned down low. Some of you are driving through places that look completely different after midnight. Some of you are cleaning a kitchen, working a night shift, sitting on a porch, or remaining in the car for a few extra minutes because going inside will make the day officially over. I don't know the room, but my voice is entering it, and that changes the room a little. Sound does that. A song can make a gas station feel cinematic. A familiar podcast can turn a hotel room into somewhere you've been before. A voice coming from the next room can make an empty house feel occupied, even when you know it's only the TV. Maybe that's part of why you come back here. We meet in different places, but the hour begins to feel familiar. I speak. You continue doing whatever the night has asked you to do. Neither of us has to fill every silence correctly. I may never see the room where you hear this. I don't know what's on the table right beside you, or what the weather's doing outside, or which ordinary object in that room carries a story that nobody else would guess. Still, for a while, we are affecting the same space. This voice becomes part of your kitchen, your car, your headphones, your dark hallway, and your attention becomes part of this channel. A place forms between us that does not exist at either end of the signal by itself. I think that's real. I also think it's strange. The best things usually manage to be both. There's one place almost everyone knows that has no fixed location. You find it when you wake in the middle of the night, and for several seconds, you don't know where you are. The ceiling's unfamiliar. A small light comes from somewhere it shouldn't. Then recognition returns and the room becomes itself. For a few seconds, you occupied a place before its story arrived. And maybe that's why, or maybe that's what we feel. In empty buildings and changed rooms, the story loosens. We see the place before memory is finished telling us what it is, and sometimes we see ourselves that way too. You ever catch your reflection in a dark store window, and for half a second it looks like another person walking beside you? You hear your own footsteps in a parking structure, and they seem to belong to someone following at exactly your pace. You enter a room where everyone knows you in one role, and suddenly that role no longer fits. The place feels wrong because you've changed shape inside it. You know, an old job can feel like that. A relationship can feel like that. A whole town can feel like that. Nothing visible has collapsed. You simply no longer fit the explanation that once held everything together. We often stay too long in places because familiarity looks like evidence that we belong. But a place can know your history without knowing your future. It can contain an old version of your life perfectly and have no room for the next one. Maybe the opposite happens too. Sometimes a new place feels familiar because it has room for the person you're becoming. You enter a little bookstore on a rainy afternoon and the body relaxes before the biography catches up. There you are. This room can hold you. That feeling isn't proof either. Places deserve time before we hand them a complete story. But I wouldn't dismiss the possibility that the body can also recognize where it can breathe. There's a difference between a place that frightens you because it's unfamiliar and a place that exhausts you because it's become too familiar in the wrong way. One asks for patience. The other may be asking for a door. But you don't need to solve that tonight. I only want you to think of one place that changed without changing. A bedroom after someone left. A store from your childhood. A road you drove every day until one evening it felt like you were seeing it for the first time. A family house where the furniture stayed but the relationships did not. A room where you received news that permanently divided your life into before and after. What was the first thing you noticed? The silence? The smell, the light? The missing person? The person you had become since the last time you stood there? Now, if you want, leave that one detail in the comments. You don't have to explain the whole story. Just tell me where the atmosphere changed. I think the magic makers listening tonight will know exactly what you mean. Maybe places don't remember us in any literal sense. Maybe memory is what happens when a place continues existing inside a person after the person is left. We carry rooms no longer standing, roads that have been renamed, and the exact sound of a screen door closing in a house we could no longer find without directions. Then we enter some other place and one detail matches. The same color of light, the same hum from a refrigerator, the same silence after somebody stops speaking. And for a second, two locations occupy the same coordinates inside us. The present room feels wrong because another room has arrived. Either way, pay attention when the atmosphere changes. You don't have to turn it into a warning, or a sign, or a haunting, or a message from somewhere beyond the fluorescent lights. You can simply notice that the room is not made of walls alone. It is made of expectation, memory, sound, absence. The people who usually stand there. The person you are when you enter. Change any one of those, and the whole place can quietly become somewhere else. Keep that signal close. You've been listening to Dove and Serpent Radio. Until next time, stay strange in the silence and keep the dial somewhere between wonder and understanding.